Hello and welcome to this video in which we will analyze the different strategic and military options, as well as the geopolitical implications of this American-Israeli attack on Iran. I told you there is no doubt about the American willingness to attack. This buildup of force, as well as the evacuation of bases around Iran, left no doubt about the intention to protect the American soldiers who are normally deployed in the region. And then there was a naval, air, and also ground buildup, which was absolutely gigantic. In particular, there were 9 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, which can theoretically fire 90 Tomahawk cruise missiles each. Some of them also have air defense capabilities with SM-2 and SM-6 missiles with anti-ballistic capabilities, meaning they can protect countries, air bases, or even the naval fleets themselves. There is also at least one Ohio-class submarine, which are nuclear submarines, missile launchers, so submarines for nuclear warfare, that have been converted to serve as bomb-launching platforms. The number of missiles, with 22 times 7 missiles that can be launched from all the tubes arranged on both sides of the submarine. Then there is the carrier strike group around the USS Abraham Lincoln, which can carry between 60 and 70 fighter jets, including 40 F-18s, about a dozen F-35Cs, which would be their first combat deployment today, as well as 7 offensive electronic warfare aircraft called Growlers, which are meant to disrupt all radio communications and radar operations. Knowing that the vast majority of the Iranian air defense has already been destroyed several times, especially during the attacks that took place last June. Plus, you also have to consider what's in the Mediterranean, with at least 2 more Aegis frigates, as well as another carrier strike group, the USS Gerald Ford, which has between 75 and 90 aircraft, the same type as those on the Abraham Lincoln. But in addition to the Navy's assets, obviously there's the Air Force, which is deployed all around Iran, with probably at least 36 F-35s, about a dozen air superiority F-22s air patrols that were spotted with Chinese satellite images and revealed their deployment, up to 48 F-16s and 36 F-15S, probably 18 A-10 ground attack aircraft. To this, you have to add all the specialized aircraft, with about a dozen KC-46s and up to 30 KC-135s for aerial refueling, at least 3 E-11A communication relay aircraft. There are 6 Sentry radar planes, probably more, but in any case, 6 have been detected, and possibly the entire American bomber fleet stationed at Diego Garcia, including the famous B-2 SES, with their GBU-57 bomb, which was used last June to strike nuclear enrichment centers, and is capable of destroying them deep inside bunkers. Then, on top of all that, if that's not enough, you obviously have the Army's resources, potentially drones, long-range drones, and surface-to-surface missiles, as seen with the ATACMS, which was widely and successfully used in Ukraine, and also the Israeli Army, which is also involved and is almost, once again, gathering all its forces. And we know how, even on their own, they already have the capability to strike deep into Iran, knowing, incidentally, that they also have men on the ground who have already been used several times to eliminate members of the regime, or scientists involved in Iranian weapons programs, in order to be able to deal with possible Iranian retaliation. After the strikes, which were predictable, there are the Americans. They were also deploying all the air defense systems at their disposal all around the area, with significant reinforcements that we saw arriving, with dozens of planes making rotations from the United States and from Europe. In particular, the THAAD system, which is deployed on site, is designed to intercept ballistic missiles before they re-enter the atmosphere. And obviously the Patriot system, which is capable of intercepting cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, and pretty much anything that flies, even though we know very well that the Iranian Air Force today is already non-existent. Not to mention, of course, the anti-ballistic systems on the Navy ships that are deployed in the Mediterranean to protect Israel, and then in the Red Sea, in the Persian Gulf, and a little bit everywhere around, to be able to protect the allies of the United States and, of course, the American bases themselves. And now that all this equipment is deployed, both offensive and defensive, there are really only 2 options for the United States. Either the goal is really to undermine Iran's ballistic missile production capacity and their ability to develop a nuclear weapon with enrichment, etc., or it's really an ambition to change the regime, to bring down this mullah's regime that is hated by the population. Remember, about 70 to 80% of the population wants this regime to end. According to surveys conducted by Gaman in 2022 and 2023 among several tens of thousands of Iranians, with obviously, unfortunately, a potential for destabilization for Iran and possibly for the entire region. And in that area, we do have a history, with the mistakes made by the United States and their willingness to intervene without being able to see things through to the end. So now, this morning, what happened? First, there was a massive attack by the United States, with Israel also involved. That's already clear because they said so. But we also found Blue Arrow aeroballistic missile boosters in Iraq, which proves they were directly used. And so we have dozens of videos with Tomahawk missile salvos here flying over Iraq. We have a lot of images of destruction in Iran, even though the images will be rare due to the internet shutdowns by the mullahs regime. And Trump revealed that the mission would be called Epic Fury, yet another bad Hollywood movie name. But for those who were wondering what the option and strategic ambition of the United States was, it is clear. They struck the decision centers, the command centers, with the bombing of the complex where Ayatollah Khomeini normally lives. Rumors suggest political figures like the Minister of Defense, reportedly killed, and the head of the Revolutionary Guards are being targeted. There are also some bases of this organization that protects the regime, which have been hit, for example, here in Damavand. And incidentally, government information sites have been hacked, and they explain that these attacks are not carried out against the people, but against the regime. Obviously, with the aim of reigniting protests and bringing down the regime. There are also some ballistic missile launch sites that have been targeted to reduce the number of missiles that will be fired at Israel and at U.S. bases in the area. But overall, uranium enrichment sites or production sites, for example, for rocket and missile fuel, were not targeted, which clearly shows that this is not the case. The main objective is certainly that this will happen at a later stage, but if it had only been that, the operation would indeed have been quick and easy to achieve. Here, the fact of striking so broadly, even into the centers of power. Very clearly, the American ambition is regime change, and we know how badly that can end there. Maybe the opportunity would be to have the Iranian protest movement rise up again and bring down this regime that is hated by the population. Except that this popular pressure, which in my opinion is the only one that has a chance of succeeding positively, has been reduced. Because of the Americans. Donald Trump urged youth to overthrow the regime, but a few months ago, when they weren't ready, the Americans didn't support them. This caused several tens of thousands, up to 35,000 deaths among this opposition. And if the Americans handle things well, we can hope that they have already united in opposition. And that they will, for example, try to encourage the army to join the population in opposition to also fight against them, against the Pasdaran, against the Revolutionary Guards, who are the ones trying today to keep the regime in power by force, by coercion, since once again this population longs for freedom. But in any case, it will be necessary to invest tens of billions of dollars to quickly rebuild the country, and not to fuel discontent against a possible future government that would be less anti-American and perhaps more secular, and in order not to simply repeat the mistakes of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. And in this scenario, there is a huge unknown, these 150,000 Pasdaran. As for what they are going to do, these are Islamist fanatics who want to spread the Islamic Revolution all over the world, to take up arms, to organize attacks, even in France. Are they simply going to lay down their arms, become civilians like all the other secular people? Obviously, it's complicated, it's hard to imagine. And so, there are fears today that these groups will create a form of pro-Islamic resistance in order to continue organizing attacks. Why not create a sort of Islamic state that would be Shiite in this case, but much better organized with many more resources, and which is already structured today. And so that's really a major concern for the future stability of Iran and the region. And then, aren't there certain areas that might try to seek more autonomy or even gain their independence? For example, we're considering the Kurds, who may seek closer ties with their brothers across the border, or the Azeris, who make up as much as 20% of the Iranian population, so there are actually more Azeris in Iran than in Azerbaijan, or the Baloch, who are shared with Pakistan and some of whom have already taken up arms against the Iranian government. So things could really go in any direction, not to mention, of course, the Iranian means of retaliation. As we've said, missiles have been fired here and there, but also the possibility of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil exported by sea and land passes, and also LNG, which is very important, and that's going to cost Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the Emirates, Qatar, and all those countries fortunes and fortunes. Obviously, they rely on exports, so they can't survive financially if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked. And on the other hand, China and India are the main buyers of this fuel. And obviously, if they can no longer keep receiving it, that's going to cause major difficulties. After losing Venezuela, now losing Iran for China is really going to be a strategic problem. And the last fear, obviously, is the escalation of the conflict, since Iran has fired missiles at Israel and at countries hosting American bases, with strikes that hit the ground, notably in Bahrain, where we see this frame. The American base, which is the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet, was hit. And we also have many images of missile interceptions in several areas. Qatar, the Emirates, Israel with that same question as well. Will these countries retaliate? Will they get involved? Will they also take part in the operations? And could this lead to an escalation in the region? And I also remind you that France has a defense agreement with the Emirates. If the Emirates are hit, if our facilities there are hit, does that mean that France will also get involved to support the Americans, to prevent a flare-up, to try to calm Iran down, or simply to stop them from continuing to fire? Those are real questions today. Could there be a flare-up that would go beyond the hypothetical collapse of Iran? Obviously, but in any case, let's be clear, there is little risk of American military losses. But if there were, it would obviously be dramatic, with a strong impact in the United States. And in any case, Trump will claim victory. He'll announce a great political and geopolitical success, no matter what the final objective is. If they fail to achieve regime change, they will have destroyed some military sites, the potential ballistic program, and some nuclear assets, after claiming they were fully destroyed. If they destroy it a second time, he can always say that it's a great success from his point of view, but it's clearly a risky gamble. And what if Trump stops after a few bombings, or after a possibly more secular government manages to take control? Well, the operation could be doomed to fail in the long run, since a possible regime change has never been a success so far. If it was simply carried out through bombings that were conducted from a distance, you really need broad popular support and significant opposition to be able to move to a new stable regime. And obviously, we must absolutely avoid ending up with the same result as Afghanistan, where the Taliban simply came back. After the United States wasted $2.5 trillion and suffered 6,400 deaths, while their allies lost more than 1,100 men, including 90 French and 158 Canadians. So we will monitor the situation. In any case, let's be clear, Iran has no way to defend itself, not even to detect. The sky is completely open. It's going to be open season for the Americans. They can do whatever they want, absolutely whatever they want in the area. Now, the question is, how resilient are they? How long will they hold out? And to what extent is the population ready to rise up en masse to bring down this regime and, as a result, support this change? And there's another point as well, which is the loss of influence once again for Russia. After having promised Maduro that he would be protected, after having obviously promised Bashar al-Assad that he would always be there, after the strategic agreement that was concluded between Moscow, Vladimir Putin, and Iran in January 2025, it's clear that Russia has no way to command respect from the United States. We simply hope that this time things will go less badly than with Bush in Iraq, who deserves nothing but the International Criminal Court for all the war crimes they committed there. I hope you enjoyed it. That was quick. Then we'll continue to follow this news, and the next video will be dedicated to Ukraine. All right, see you very soon.
I'm going to warn you very easily. World War III very easily.